but I liked it.
Yeah. Because I understood it and I was even after this 15 minutes.
Yeah. We call it in Germany, we call it CT. Cum tempore. That thing. And ST means you have to be there on time. Yeah, traditionally, yes. It's changing now.
Yeah, so. Yeah, now with this new waves of globalization,
Yeah.
same everywhere.
I still tend to be very much on time.
Me too. I like this, to be organized.
Vážený pán predseda Banskobystrického samosprávneho kraja, vážený pán podpredseda, dear profesor Richenhagen, v mene vedenia Univerzity Mateja Bela, osobne aj v mene pána rektora, si vás dovolujem privítať na pôde Univerzity Mateja Bela. Témou tohto nášho stretnutia v súvislosti s tým, čo odprezentuje pán profesor Richenhagen, by mal byť regionálny rozvoj. Všetci tak, ako tu sedíme, sa istým spôsobom tejto témy dotýkame. Sme na území kraja, ktorý je z tohto pohľadu veľmi špecifický, ponúka významné príležitosti, ktoré vyplývajú nielen z jeho výhodnej geografickej polohy, ale tiež z rôznosti podmienok. Je to jediný, alebo teda jeden z mála krajov, ktorý poskytuje poľnohospodárske podmienky, je tu vinárska oblasť, naproti tomu sú tu vysokohorské podmienky, ktoré umožňujú významný rozvoj turizmu a určite významné postavenie v súvislosti s príležitosťami na rozvoj Banskobystrického samosprávneho kraja poskytuje aj Univerzita Mateja Bela a vôbec univerzitné vzdelávanie, ktorého sme my dvaja spolu s kolegom z Univerzity vo Zvolene zástupcami v tej dnešnej diskusii a v tejto dnešnej spoločnosti. Takže ja pevne dúfam, že aj zo strany vedenia Banskobystrického samosprávneho kraja je Univerzita Mateja Bela a Technická univerzita vo Zvolene vnímaná ako veľmi významná inštitúcia, ktorá súvisí s možnosťami, s potenciálom, s intelektuálnym potenciálom a dáva samosprávnemu kraju v tomto zmysle významné postavenie. Nie len z toho pohľadu, že tu študuje zhruba 7 000 študentov a máme viac ako 1000 akademických zamestnancov, ale v podstate aj z toho postavenia univerzity ako mestotvorného činiteľa a z pohľadu teda možností, ktoré z tohto všetkého vyplývajú. O tom všetkom predpokladám, že budeme tiež dnes hovoriť, alebo teda aspoň bude na to príležitosť a práve v tomto kontexte oceňujem, že práve na pôde našej univerzity k tejto diskusii a v podstate k tejto téme dnes príde a budeme o tom hovoriť. Takže ešte raz vás všetkých na pôde univerzity vítam a verím, že toto podujatie nám poskytne nielen informácie, ale aj kontakty a želám všetkým príjemný deň. Takže ďakujem pekne. Ešte by som chcel privítať samozrejme aj našich študentov a študentky. Ďakujem.
The President and Vice President of Banská Bystrica Self-Governing Region, dear Vice Rector, dear Professor Richenhagen, dear guests and dear students. It's a great honor for us to host this event at the Faculty of Economics. We are happy after 2 years of ongoing pandemic. Excuse me for some please. Okay. We are happy after 2 years of ongoing pandemic to switch from online to face-to-face events. Moreover, to start with such a respectable guest here. We are sure that this lecture will be enriching for all of our colleagues and students, especially for those who are dealing with the regional development in their work and studies. We would like to express our huge thanks to Professor Richenhagen to come to Banská Bystrica and share his rich experience with us. So thank you again.
Ďakujem. Vážený pán profesor Richenhagen, vážený pán prorektor, vážená pani prodekanka, vážené auditorium, je mi cťou na pôde univerzity privítať takýchto vzácnych hostí. Vzhľadom na svoj vek som mal možnosť prežiť 50 rokov, to je druhá polovina 20. storočia, v našej krajine v čase, kedy ekonomika sa menila a podľa zásad, ktoré priniesli noví ľudia, ktorí chceli robiť zmeny, to znamená zrušili súkromné vlastníctvo, zrušili vzťah náš aj k pôde, dá sa povedať, že narušili aj našu zodpovednosť za dedičstvo našich predkov, ale aj za zodpovednosť za svoje životy. To si je treba uvedomiť vzhľadom na to, že žijeme teraz v 21. storočí a sme v čase zmien. V čase zmien, kedy vám niektorí povedia také nostalgie, že bolo lepšie, v čase totality, tých 50 rokov, čo sme zažívali. Ale keď sa pozrieme na výsledky, na zaostávanie našej krajiny a vôbec celého sovietskeho bloku, tak je jasné, že naša cesta, a som rád, že sme sa v 21. storočí a sa hlasíme ako k Európe, k demokracii. Vidíme, že o tú demokraciu je treba aj bojovať. A preto vítam každú aktivitu, ktorá na pôde Banskobystrického samosprávneho kraja alebo vôbec v našej krajine, aktivity, ktoré spejú k tomu, aby sme sa dokázali primknúť ku svetovej ekonomike, lebo to tiež není jednoduchý proces, je to bolestivý proces, vidíme to, keď sa rozprávame s farmármi, akým spôsobom sa vyrovnávajú s dotačným systémom, ktorý je z Európskej únii daný, alebo teda prinieslo to, ale inú cestu nemáme, len znovu, tak ako naši predkovia, ako naša krajina bola v minulých storočiach, byť v Európe, mať otvorený obchod, možnosti obchodovania, možnosti spolupráce. Takže vítam návštevu pána Richenhagena a jeho kolektívu, ktorí sú tu viacerí. A vítam, že prišli a že si dali tú prácu preklenúť to more. A teším sa aj na to, že budeme mať taký bočný pohľad, ako oni to vidia z Ameriky, lebo nie všetko, lebo informácie treba mať viacej, aby sme pochopili procesy a nastavili ich tak, aby aby to nebolo pre nás bolestivé, aby sme si našli miesto v tejto spoločnosti demokratických krajín a v tom svetovom obchode. Myslím si, že inú cestu nemáme. Ešte raz ďakujem vám všetkým, celému auditóriu, ktorí ste tu, za to, že ste prišli a ďakujem aj tým, ktorí nám dajú tú prednášku, pánovi Richenhagenovi ešte raz. A pekný deň vám prajem.
Thank you very much. I welcome you, everybody here in University of Mateja Bela. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Mr. Richenhagen here in Banská Bystrica. First of all, I would like to say, before I will make space for Mr. Professor Richenhagen for his speech, I would like to say some organizational comments. Everybody will have a space after the presentation to pose the question, and if you have any question during the presentation, you can write them on Slido with the hashtag of BBSK. The presentation will have like 30 to 40 minutes, and after the presentation we will have plenty space for a discussion. And now, let me introduce you Mr. Richenhagen, and I just would like to pick some points from his very rich curriculum vitae. Nowadays, he is chairman of the board of Axios, Sustainable Growth Acquisition Corporation. Before, he was chairman, president, and CEO of ACCO Corporation, which is a global manufacturer and distributor of agriculture equipment. He was in that position from 2004 to 2020. He is active member of supervisory board of Daimler Truck Holding. He is active member of advisory board of Steel Holding. He was the chairman of the German-American Chambers of Commerce of the United States, and he was in the U.S. Advisory Council on doing business in Africa for United States President Barack Obama. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Professor Martin Richenhagen, floor is yours.
I think you start with saying dobre. First of all, thank you very much for your kind invitation. I really feel honored, Pan President, to be here at this prestigious university and have the opportunity to discuss with you. I know what a great school this is, and I feel really good to be here this morning. I would also thank Jan Lunter and his son Andre for all the support, because I think it shows that the exchange between business, politics, and the academic world works very well in this part of your country. I have a long history of coming to what at that time was called the Czech Republic, and I came here between 1965 and about 1975, once a year for 1 week with a bus of students from Bonn, Germany. We came to Prague, and we were not allowed at that time to travel because this was communist Czechoslovakia, and we were not allowed to travel around the country. With one exception, we could make a stop at Pilsen, which was very much appreciated, because not only that they had excellent restrooms, but we could also refill in the brewery. So I will never forget the friendship, and I still have friends which basically in the previous structure. And my father-in-law is from Leitmeritz, which is in I think, I don't know how you call it, Sudetendeutschland. So he was born here, he spoke the language, and he's also buried here. So that means when we go there, his graveyard is in your neighborhood, let's put it like this. Nobody could see that, let's say, could forecast the development of your country. In 1968, we wanted to go to Czechia, to the Czech Republic. This was during the Dubček times, and our parents said, no way, it's too dangerous. So they sent us to Paris, and we were in Paris in May '68 during the student revolution. So that means these times were very, very much defined by change, by new ideas, by people who started to believe in democracy again, in private property, in free trade, things Jan Lunter just lined out. What I want to share with you this morning at the beginning, I'm very impressed by the audience, because when you come to universities today, specifically business schools or agricultural faculties, you, let's say, best case, have maybe 5 to 10% female attendance. Here I'm very impressed by the very many young, capable women I see, which is already outstanding, and which shows that you are a very modern university. I tried to talk to you with no PowerPoint presentation, so this morning I don't talk PowerPoint. Everybody does it, and the reason is that nobody needs to listen. And you can read, or you can get a copy later on, and then you can say, oh, I didn't hear that. So I just want to talk to you from my heart, from my little brain, as much as is still available. And I would like to talk to you about the commonalities between my company and what I did in my company and your area, because we shared, without knowing, certain visions, because I always also was of the opinion that the rural, more remote areas of the world have to be developed. Why was that important? So I was in charge of a global manufacturer of farm equipment, tractors, combine harvesters, everything a farmer needs. Famous brands like Massey Ferguson, Valtra, Fendt, and the factories were always on the countryside, because the idea behind was that the companies wanted to be close to the customers. So when you want to do business with a farmer, why should then your company be in Paris or New York? So my company always was on the countryside in rural areas, and therefore we, I think, understood the needs of these developing areas, the potential of the developing areas. I strongly believe that the rural areas are more safe. The people in the rural areas are more down to earth. They're more modest. They are prepared to work hard. They are easy to be motivated. And so therefore I always liked to be in those areas. The company Echo basically started from quite a disaster, a management failure. So there was a big German conglomerate in Cologne, not in the rural areas, in a big city, and the company was called Klöckner Humboldt Deutz. The CEO at that time decided that he wanted to go to the United States. They did not have business in the United States. They had a very diversified product offering, from construction equipment, trucks, tractors, farm equipment. And so they decided to buy a very well-known company in America called Allis-Chalmers. And then, without any understanding for the rural needs of the American farmers, they made important changes. Important in their eyes, also relevant for the customers, but they didn't understand the negative side effects. The first thing they changed immediately was changing the famous brand name Allis-Chalmers into Deutz, which in American, in English, is almost impossible to pronunciate. It was called Dütz or something like that, and people didn't know what it really meant. Then second, in farm equipment, the paint color of your product is important. So you are either green or red or blue. So Allis-Chalmers was orange, and Deutz decided to change everything into green. They also decided to discontinue the local American product line, which were strong water-cooled diesel engines, and they changed it into air-cooled diesel engines. This was, Deutz always believed in air-cooled equipment. Unfortunately, they did not understand the local needs, the temperature, the climates in North America, and that green tractor with a strange brand out of a sudden also didn't work as well in Texas or in the southern states, because the climate was by far too hot and the air cooling couldn't handle that. Technology was just wrong. So after only 2 years from being a very important player in the United States, that company became a different player. They were about 250 million in revenues only, from 2.5 billion down to 250 million. But they were very successful because the results before taxes were at the same amount, unfortunately negative. So 250 million in revenues and 250 million in losses. So the manager in Germany, a guy I know very well, Kajo Neukirchen, who was supported by the city guys, he was supported by Deutsche Bank, without any understanding for the industry, became nervous and then decided that he needed a change manager. So he hired somebody, my predecessor, from the tire industry. Also, this guy had no idea about farm equipment. He did not know the needs of the farmers, and he was not in a position to turn that business around. So finally, then headquarters in Cologne decided to sell the business. So you can imagine a company which generates losses in this amount is not really worth a lot. So finally, they didn't find a buyer. And my predecessors, the founders of ECO in 1990, decided to do a management buyout. And they bought the company very cheap. And they did do something intelligent when Igor, listen, comes to finance. They basically sold all receivables, and they were debt-free after the deal, after the acquisition. But they also didn't have any cash flow anymore because they had sold all receivables already. So that made them be very, very cost-minded and very cost-efficient. And so they started with one brand only, mainly parts business. And from there on, in times where our industry consolidated and basically a lot of private-owned, mid-sized, smaller companies, but also big companies disappeared, went bankrupt, merged, a big consolidation took place. ECO was a very active player in this. And the first years of the company, ECO did about 30 acquisitions. I was working at Class at that time, family-owned. I was more a believer of family-owned companies because I thought It's better to have an owner you can trust, where you have a good relationship with, than working with the Wall Street and with shareholders and analysts. And Mr. Klaas and I, we were sitting in Westphalia. We were always saying, well, actually, now they go bankrupt. With the next acquisition, they certainly go bust. But they didn't, because they made one very, very important acquisition, which was Fendt. Fendt basically saved the company because of their outstanding technologies and also their good financial performance. So this was the first 2 chapters of the history of ECHO, which I would summarize. Chapter 1, misunderstanding rural needs and the needs of the customers and farmers. Second chapter was being an active player in the consolidation. They took a lot of risk. So when we were still working on due diligence and we wanted to be very precise, they already had closed the deal. In 2004, well, then unfortunately in 2000, American companies have jets. So every CEO is proud to have a jet. In Europe, a CEO is proud to have a car and a driver. So American CEOs don't have drivers, but they have pilots. So, and the corporate jet basically crashed in Birmingham, England, and the CEO, the COO, the CFO, and 3 pilots died. So the company had no succession anymore. I knew my predecessor, and he called me and he said, well, would you be interested to be on the long list to become my successor? And I said, oh, I feel very honored, like this morning here. It's a pleasure, but I thought, well, yeah, I will never make it, because they had 16 candidates and only one was not American citizen, which was me. A German, speaking the most spoken language in the world, which is what? Broken English. And so I thought they will certainly not hire me. After the first meeting, I changed my mind, because the first meeting went so well that I hadn't told my wife and my family. I have 3 children. I came back home and said, what if we would move to the United States? And my wife said, never. She was a teacher. She didn't trust the Americans so much. And my kids were excited. So they were really full of energy. They always liked the United States, like every kid in Europe. They dream, they see the TV soap operas and think that this is how America works. And so in 2004, I was hired as the CEO of ECHO Corporation, and I moved to the US on my own at the beginning, because I said, well, it's still risky when you do a move like this, and I wasn't sure whether I would survive. So the first family member who joined me was my daughter, who went to university then in the United States, and my wife and my youngest son came last. My oldest son couldn't come. That's all about immigration, because he was already 21 years of age, and he was not allowed to come to the US with us under our visa. So he had to stay he was in Switzerland at that time, working for a consultant firm. He had a background, he studied agriculture, and he's an agricultural engineer of University of Bonn, my university. To talk briefly about my way, it's basically not something you should consider as a perfect example. So I studied Catholic theology, philosophy, and French matters. So French literature and language, Italian. And my dream was to either be, I wasn't sure whether I should become a priest. I think if I would have become a priest, I would be the Pope now, most probably. That's a joke. So I was between doing something like that, and then I wanted maybe to stay at university, become a professor or a journalist. and I ended up and became a high school teacher in Germany, teaching religion and French. And I liked it. But because I have a big family, I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. My father was just a teacher. We didn't have plenty of money. My father had no car, no driver's license. We didn't have TV. We didn't have phone in the 50s. I decided to become independent, and I financed my studies through running a small business. So I was running a riding school for dressage, little Vienna, so to say, in a way. And already in the first year of university, I had 2 horses, I had a horse truck, I had a Mercedes-Benz 200 diesel, so I felt very, very successful. And I basically then had a client, a customer who owned a steel business, a steel company, private-owned steel company. And he said, well, what you are doing is all wrong. In the morning, you basically take care of spoiled children of other people, and then you do the same in the afternoon in your riding school. Do you want to do that also when you're 10 or 20 years older? Do you have any kind of long-term plan? And he made jokes about me all the time. And one day I said, Mr. Thumann, I'm sick and tired, so you either make a proposal or a recommendation what I should do, or you stop making jokes like that. And then he said, well, basically come to my office, and then we talk about it. So I went to his office. I had my best corduroys on. I didn't believe in ties at that time and suits. And I had my best leather jacket on, Lacoste polo shirt. And so the first thing he said, this is not how we are used to host people coming to interviews. And I said, Mr. Thumann, I don't know that this is an interview. So finally, he offered me a job, which was becoming a trainee with a very condensed trainee program and a correspondence study in business. And the financial deal was that I did earn the same money after taxes, because for state employee teacher, it's important not what you earn on paper, but what you earn cash after taxes. So I had the same salary, but could study again. And this was, I found that very, very motivational. And despite one of my beliefs, I think it's very important that during your whole life, you have to be prepared, or you want to be prepared and interested to learn. Don't believe that when you finish here, you're done. You need to have the mindset to say, well, my business is lifetime learning, which is much more important today than in the past, because the conditions, the environment is changing much, much faster than ever before. So, and after 7 years, I was the CEO of the company. The owner basically decided to be the chairman. I was the CEO. This only works in a family-owned business. A relationship like this only works when there is a very good trust-based relationship between the owner, between the family, and the external manager. If not, this doesn't work. And it worked very well until about 3 years later, we then sold the company very successfully to British Steel. And the family was very satisfied because the timing was right. If they would have kept the company much longer, they wouldn't have gotten nothing, so to say, and we sold basically at the peak point. So we were in a position to get a very, very, very excellent price. The family got. I did get a very nice handshake, but this is also family-owned. It's not about big compensation. It's about motivation. It's about working well together and team spirit. So now back to the United States. I was then in 2004. I became the CEO of the first bigger public-owned company. And at that time, I don't want to talk too much about the success or things like that. You can read those, and I like to base it on numbers. When I joined the company, revenues were at 3 billion. When I left, there were more than 10 billion. When I joined, the stock price was $8. When I left, it was $120. Today, it's $140. So my successor does even a better job. There was no HR, there was no investor relation. The company did not pay a dividend, and there was no credit rating. So we performed very, very well. And when I retired, after more than 16 years, I handed over I called it always a money printing machine to my successor. And you can imagine that all the shareholders were pleased. So that means I did have a lot of support from the shareholders and also from Wall Street and the analysts. Now, people always say, well, when you work in a public-owned company compared to private-owned, is not so good because you always have to manage to deliver quarterly results, and there's no long-term strategy and vision. In my case, this was wrong because I had a clear strategy, I had a clear vision, and it was always supported by my shareholders. Why? Because it worked. So when you present a strategy and when you talk about it to your shareholders and it fails, you are done. The average lifetime of a Fortune 500 CEO in the United States is 2.5 years. So I did it 16.5 years, so that means I certainly lived longer than average. The question is now when you take over a company, you need to develop a strategy. And I strongly believe that this is the job of the CEO. The CEO has to develop a strategy with his team, has to present this to the supervisory board, has to get the approval of the supervisory board and of the shareholders, and then he has to deliver. So, and that's what I did. I formed a very small team of young and old, men and women, all kind of countries, very international team, only 8 people. To put something like that together is not so easy. And then we decided that we would be in a position to develop that strategy within 2 weeks. Very ambitious. We had done some work before, so what you need to do before you start strategy work, you need to understand the market. Who are your customers? What are the customer requirements? You need to talk about your competition, and then you need to define your objectives. What do you want to achieve? And where are the gaps? Here in your area, you have an outstanding business, which my friends and I believe has a lot of potential, but needs a lot of know-how, good management and business know-how, and a lot of money to grow the business. And this is the business of protein-based, plant-based proteins. You could also simply call it tofu if you liked. And this diamond, which is here in your area, I think, has a huge opportunity to develop into a global business, to create jobs, more jobs in your area. You have a very strong brand, which needs to be kept. So don't consider to sell the company to somebody who calls it then John Deere or something. You need to understand the value of your brand. You need to understand the value of your technologies. And you need to think about, well, we will talk about ideas, and we want to be a partner in making this the best tofu company in the entire universe, Michael Jackson would say, which is not easy. And we talked about families and trust. This only works when you trust us and when we trust you. I bought a private-owned combine business in China, trusted the owner, but he was really taking advantage of us and faking numbers and things like that. So this needs some work, but it basically also needs an understanding. You need to make sure that you are on the same page with the various partners. I'm very proud of certain things I could achieve. And the proudest thing, or the proudest achievement, is that I was in a position to create 10,000 new jobs in rural India, in rural areas from India, Africa, Europe, even Russia, Ukraine, completely new jobs because of new business in these areas and because of internal organic growth. And I think when you think of ethics, why do you do business? We can learn a lot from family-owned companies. Family owners typically feel much more committed to their people. They feel much more committed to their brand. They feel much more committed to the area they do business in. They are excellent global or local citizens with high ethical standards. They engage in politics because they want their area or their country to develop in the right direction. They want their people to be successful. And this is more in private-owned companies than in public-owned companies, because in public-owned companies, the main focus, that's a nice old tractor, in public-owned companies, the focus is on earnings, on profits. How profitable is the company? What I learned from private owners is they tend to be prepared to reinvest their money into their company instead of taking it out and spending it in France on the Côte d'Azur or in some other expensive hobbies. So when you think about the vision one could develop in our business, in food and ag, I think you can derive it directly from the developments of the world. In 1900, how many people did live on Earth in 1900? Any idea? 1 billion. That was like paradise. In 2000, already 5 billion. Actually, I'm wrong. It was 1 billion in 1800, 2 billion in 1900, 5 billion in 2000. Today, we are close to 8 billion. And the population is still growing. We will be at around 10 billion soon. We have about 800 million people on Earth who are starving, who don't have enough to eat. We have a change in the customer behavior. Customers would like to have healthy, good quality food. They want the farmers to be careful with the environment, water, soil, air, and they want the animals to have a maybe short but healthy and happy life. So that's not so easy to be achieved. Now the vision I think I have is that you can feed the world with high-tech solutions, of which one is the protein, the plant-based protein. Because very soon, people will not want to eat, I like steak. I had a wonderful venison yesterday evening in a wonderful restaurant in Vienna. So therefore, I'm not a religious vegetarian or vegan. But what we can clearly see is the trends are going towards using or eating less meat, which is also not so good for the environment, eating meat from animals that had a happy life, and maybe develop and look for alternatives, which is a specialty of a very successful company in your area. I don't want to do too much advertising here, but you know already whom I'm talking about. And this is another strength of family-owned companies. Family-owned companies tend to be innovative. They tend to be quick and fast. They tend to develop technologies, and they believe in what they're doing. With this being said, I would like to open the floor for question and answers, Mr. President. Is this okay? All right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Richenhagen. Thank you very much for your very interesting speech, and also thank you for advertisement. And now I would like to pose the question.
The invoice will be handed over this evening.
So now suddenly I realized that I don't know of which kind of company you were talking. All right, so here we have the first question.
We have a whole list of successful tofu companies,
exactly.
as you can imagine.
In Banská Bystrica. All right, so first question from the public. Can world agriculture sector could work without Russia participation? This is a very interesting question due to the situation in Ukraine. So if you have any answer for us, we would be very willing to.
Yeah, first of all, I would like to take agriculture off and make it the first question. Of course, the world can live without Russia. We don't need Russia. Russia needs us. We certainly could find important synergies in a cooperation with Russia, but it's not so that we need it. Does the world need agriculture? Russian agriculture is not important. So Russia is not an important exporter of agricultural goods. They export some. But they are an attractive importer, so they are a very attractive region to do business. Selling German pigs to Russia, or Italian ham, or French foie gras. So Russia is an important or attractive market. So I'm very, very, very disappointed, and I'm saddened about what's happening in Russia. And we were sitting together and talked about the strategy for our business in the future. And at that time, this is only a few weeks ago, we were all convinced that Russia would not start a war in Ukraine, and we were all wrong. I have personally met Putin several times. And I always thought that he's intelligent, that he has a great plan, good strategies, and now I don't understand what he's doing and why he is doing this. And hopefully we get through that. I do understand why Russia wanted to have access to the Kremlin, and the reason is that the Crimea area was always part of Russia. And only then under Khrushchev, during the Soviet Republic, basically Khrushchev as a kind gesture handed over Crimea to the Ukraine. So, and during this organization, it didn't matter whether it was part of Ukraine or Russia or Belarus, who cared. And of course, today it's very important for Russia because this is their access to the Black Sea. And therefore, I think the idea that they would leave this area after they occupied it was somewhat theoretical. Kissinger, the very famous American politician, and I was a very close friend of Mr. Genscher from Germany, very famous Secretary of State of Germany for very many years. And they both were of the opinion that the Ukraine should have a kind of neutral status, not being part of NATO or being part of the Russian organization, but being neutral, a little bit like Switzerland. And I could imagine that maybe this could be the way forward. But do we need Russia in agriculture? No. Does Slovakia need Russia? Certainly not.
Thank you very much. There is another question. Do you think that the really fast growth of the prices of the energies in the European Union will cause the lesser competition or competitiveness of the products from the European Union on the global market?
Yeah, the simple answer is yes. So already today, the high cost of energy is an important disadvantage to the industries, to the companies in the EU, specifically in Germany, because the German decision came without any plan behind. Very quickly, Chancellor Merkel decided we exit nuclear power, we exit coal, and then they have the problem that the Germans don't like the idea that we generate wind power, which has to be generated at the coastline, but when you want to bring wind power to where the important consumers are, which is southern Germany, they don't want to have power lines going north to south. So Germany certainly has no strategy, and I think it's a demonstration of the failure of politicians, where other countries maybe can learn from. Instead of producing nuclear power with efficient, modern nuclear power plants we are now importing nuclear powers from France, from old-fashioned, not so safe power plants. You have a nuclear power plant nearby. I hope it's in good condition. And it's certainly a very environmental friendly way on how to produce energy.
Thank you very much. There is another question. We would like to ask you about your opinion on regional differences. The Slovakia is the country where there is a big difference between the economic power of the regions. What is the way out of this difference? How to make the country more equal and also more equal in terms of European Union? And is the agriculture the answer?
Yeah, what I believe is you need to think about what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses. Your weakness is you are a small country. The domestic demand is therefore not really important. So if you would decide to produce cars for the local market, maybe not a great idea. What is your strength? I think your strength, mainly how I see it, I don't know everything, but how I see it are your people. You have very, very skilled people who know their business, who know their trade. Traditionally already, you had industries here long before other parts of Europe started to look into that. And your people are comparable, very motivated for a former, you should always remember from where you're coming. So communism wasn't really great in motivating people, but you always had a different mentality. And this is certainly a strength. Your labor, cost of labor is low, which makes you a very attractive area to invest in labor-intensive industries. And this is therefore why you also have important investment like Continental and companies like that who come here, automotive manufacturers and suppliers come here. I think also farming certainly has a potential. What you need, and you have this in the meantime, and your father talked about it, you need private ownership of land. Because I strongly believe that a farmer who owns his land does a much better job than somebody who works on a state-owned farm. And then when it comes to farming, you need to think about, are there any products where the conditions here in your country are better? Climate, soil, know-how. I wouldn't think that you want to be #1 in red wine, but maybe you can develop this as a nice niche business. Things like that.
Thank you. I just would like to react and pose additional question to what you said. You have mentioned Continental and automotive business, which is very labor intensive. That's true, but the problem in Slovakia is that added value is created somewhere else. And the question of nowadays is how to attract business with added value. Because also for a city like Banská Bystrica, this is the important question, since the lot of students which you see right now in the audience will leave Banská Bystrica due to the lack of the proper job opportunities after they finish the university.
I believe that your company is a good example for an intelligent solution for this market, for this area. And I think it has, as I said already, huge growth potential. Now you need to bring it out of this country into the world, Europe maybe first, but then also US and other markets, but still keep the value added here in your area. And I think this is the way. And there's certainly other industry where you could do something similar.
Thank you. So domestic businesses needs to learn how to export.
Yes.
Simply. Okay. All right. Another question: how global warming can influence structure of agriculture sectors in countries around the world and their self-production?
Well, first of all, the situation is as such that things are a little bit more unpredictable because we don't know yet exactly how the climate will develop. Overall, globally, it's a wash. So we have areas which suffer, like we have right now, as we speak, a huge drought in parts of Africa. We have lakes that dry out forever. But we also have areas where the climate change is positive for farming. So therefore, overall, for the farming business, it's more or less neutral. For people like Echo, they just have a different geographical mix. But for farmers in specific areas, it can be a disaster to the extent that farming in certain areas might become impossible. So therefore, it's very important that this is understood and that we develop ideas how to overcome this. What I want to point out is something the farmers don't talk so much about. Farming, everybody is blaming farmers for cow creating too much CO2. That's all not relevant. Farming is the only business in the world where CO2 can be consumed and stored permanently. So I know the numbers, they are impressive and important, but farmers don't talk about it.
Thank you.
No farmers, no nation is one of my beliefs.
All right, there is another question. What do you consider as the most important factor for a country in terms of production of the food? I'm trying to understand this question and to give you more close.
I would love to help you with the translation, but as I said, it's not only that I don't understand it, also I can't read it.
Yes.
Because of your many different accents you put on top of the letters.
I will use this situation since I know who posed the question, and I will ask Mr. Mužila whether you can say it a bit longer version, then I will understand the question more.
He decided to disappear. I can translate that, you get a mic.
Aha, pardon.
Ďakujem pekne. Tak ešte raz, volám sa Vladimír Mužila. Robím v tej oblasti poľnohospodárstva a okrajov, robíme produkty pre poľnohospodárov, sú to hlavne substráty, výživa, hnojivá a tak ďalej. Ale zaujíma ma práve taká otázka z pohľadu vôbec stratégia vývoja výroby potravín. Čo by mala krajina ako taká preferovať, aby bola zabezpečená potravinová sebestačnosť alebo aspoň obmedzené maximálne nejaké rizika, pretože ten vývoj, sám ste povedal, pán profesor, že sa roztvárajú nožnice medzi výrobnými kapacitami potravín na planéte a populáciou, nárastom populácie. Takže z tohto pohľadu, čo by malo byť teda ešte pre tú krajinu najdôležitejšie, aké priority a čo by mala uprednostniť z pohľadu stratégie potravinovej výroby.
Ďakujem pekne, teraz rozumiem viac otázke. So I'll try to translate. Whether you think that self-sufficiency of the country in terms of the food is an important idea, and if it's so, what the country as Slovakia needs to do in order to be self-sufficient in terms of food?
I think in the modern world, in the European community, you do not need to be self-sufficient. We don't need to produce champagne in Germany or pigs in areas where there's not enough land, or corn in areas where you don't have enough water or where the climate is not good enough. So to produce wheat in the mountains of Tyrolia in Austria is maybe not a good idea. So therefore, I think you need to think about this more in an international or global way. And I think countries will by far be more successful if they focus on products where they're very good at and where they have a competitive advantage, which can be soil, which can be climate, which can be water. And therefore, and it can also be know-how. So I wouldn't start to produce French cheeses in Slovakia or frog legs or something like that. So you need to think about what is your country best at, and then you export these products to the other countries and import the products where you're not as good at. This happens also in between countries. Like, for example, I did grow up in a mining area, like here. And the soil was actually pretty good. It was in the Rhine River Valley, and they are specialized there in sugar beets. So everything is sugar beets. So if you think about that area in an insulated manner, you would say, oh my gosh, they're not self-sufficient because you can't survive from sugar beets. But because they're so successful in sugar beets and sugar, they have no problem to import everything else from other areas. Grain, wheat from northern Germany, milk from or dairy products from southern Germany. So therefore, you need to think about this in a more intelligent global way. The idea of self-sufficiency is pretty much coming from the mid-1900s, 2000s, where countries wanted to be independent. They wanted to have steel, coal, cars, food, because they didn't want to work together with other countries. Like Germany was a perfect example for that.
I definitely can relate to your idea in terms of European Union market, but do you think that even the challenges which we see nowadays in the global supply chain does not changing this idea that in terms of regions we should be self-sufficient? Let's use the example of our production of soya, and we've seen during the period of 1 year that the price for the soya has tripled due to the China policy of buying out of the primary products. So do you think even nowadays, when we see that the global supply chain is being disrupted, it's still not a good goal to have a regional self-sufficiency?
Of course, you need to have certain products which are important for you close to where you are. Like, for example, soya beans from Romania. So that means, I agree, not everything can be completely globalized.
Okay, thank you. There is another question that, what do you think is the way how we can make the better way for the young generation to work in agriculture? We have a lot of young people over here, and we know that when we see the average age in the agriculture sector is about the average of the age of the general population. So what do you think, what is the way how to attract young people?
First and most important is a good education. So young people need to have a great education, and then they find very attractive jobs in agriculture, because we have the demand, maybe not in your country, but in general globally, the demand for skilled people in agriculture is much higher than the supply. So when you want to become a farmer, come to the United States or to Germany, you're much needed there. So you need to be flexible. That's very important, and that's my recommendation to everybody. We talked about regional and how much we want to develop the region, but for young people it's also important to be prepared to move around the world and work elsewhere. You need to be prepared to learn, and what is very important is not only study your special matter, but also always think about learning at least 1 or 2 languages fluently. That helps.
I just would like to correct Mr. Richenhagen over here. Do not leave Slovakia and stay in our region, and we'll do all we can for you to stay here.
Well, if you want to work for ECHO, maybe we make an exception and start to invest in Slovakia.
That's right, but the statistics are not very optimistic about this trend. But hopefully it will change. Another question. At the beginning, you were talking about women in business. How do you see the role of women in agricultural business?
Very important. Traditionally, I think people who know farming know that maybe women on farms are a little bit under the radar screen, but all important decisions on a family farm are basically also taken by the mother. So including what tractor they buy. So therefore women are very important. What you can see is that there is a trend, and that you have more women being active in farming than ever before. And I think that's a very positive trend, because in general women are pretty good. So men need to be careful here, because the world is getting more competitive, which is good.
Thank you. Another question. what is a big issue nowadays in agro business, or the question which needs to be solved?
Well, of course, also for agribusiness, the cost of energy, the cost of inputs like fertilizers and pesticides is a negative factor, but it's by far overruled by all the positive factors, because what we can already see is the problems in Russia and Ukraine basically did have an impact on commodity prices. So that means profitabilities of our farms this year and the next years will certainly be much better than before. The future is bright for farmers.
Thank you. Dr. Pavlik posed the question, dear professor, what is your opinion on the possibilities of practical use of fungi for the decomposition of various municipal waste or agroforestry wastes?
Yeah, what I know is that there are a lot of ideas around, a lot of technologies worked on. There's no big-scale technology yet available, but I think this will come very soon.
Another question, Mr. Richenhagen, how do you see the role of the state in the management of agricultural sector?
Yeah, that's my personal position, has always been, I don't want the state to have any role in business. So whenever you have subsidies or whenever the state tries to influence business, it's going into the wrong direction. Business knows what to do much better than politicians. Sorry for that, Andre. There are exceptions. No, there are really exceptions, but because it's very rare that you find a politician who had a successful career in business before, who is running and owning a business. That doesn't happen very often. So, and therefore in farming, I would like to see no subsidies at all, and I would like the markets to basically handle that by themselves. This needs a transition, so you can do that from one day to the other, but when you believe in plant-based proteins, you also don't believe so much into pig production anymore, which means that, for example, pig production in Westphalia might disappear. And that is a trend the state should not influence, but the state should help those farmers who have invested in expensive facilities which they can't use then anymore in the future.
I get scared at the beginning of your answer that the time is running out and we need to finish, but then you correct it. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, now we have a question from Mr. President.
Moja otázka je, že kto sa všetko zaoberá s tým, akú kapacitu vlastne na Zemi máme, koľko ľudí vieme uživiť. Viem za mojich časov, keď som čítal tie prognozy, tak čo bolo hranicou, tak to sa stále posúva, ale tak či tak tie hranice zrejme existujú.
Thank you. Very interesting question. That whether do you have opinion or there is any research that what is the total amount of people which can be fed globally on the earth? We know that nowadays there is how much 7 billion of citizens of the earth, and what do you know about the target or the border, maximum border?
What I know is that if we want to feed 10 billion people, which will be the case very soon, within maybe 20 years, we have the capacity and the know-how how to feed those people, including taking care of the 800 million who have nothing to eat right now. The challenge is not in production. So farming is very, very efficient, and when you look into farming, this is the industry which outperforms every other industry in productivity gains and efficiency gains. The problem is logistics. So we need to bring food from very efficient producing countries into inefficient countries. And that basically is a challenge, but technically it's possible. So there are research results which prove that. But it's a very good question.
And what do you think about the GMO products?
Yeah, I'm not so much concerned about GMO because that's a very Western European obsession, and it's influenced by schools already or in kindergarten. So in America, these foods are called biological engineered products. Okay? In Germany, they're called gene manipulated products. So that's a complete different mindset. So the German term is already negative. So there is not one example in the entire universe where a human being or an animal has suffered from negative side effects of GMO food. There are certain negative side effects when it comes to resistances, and farmers don't like the fact that the producer of GMO seeds basically sell it with a kind of license fee and things like that. But I have no concern to eat GMO products. But what we need also to accept are the requirements of consumers. I don't think that in Europe you can change this back. So we need to accept that customers, clients, consumers in Europe want to eat food which is non-GMO. And I think we need to make sure that this is available for them because they pay for it. And they also pay a higher price for it. And therefore, I think we don't want to change that maybe.
Please.
It's okay. In context of this question, Mr. Professor, I have one question. How is possible to achieve the decreasing of prices of bioproducts and eco-products? Because I think that for majority people in Slovakia, they are too expensive. It's possible to support or to find some finance tool for this on the level, for example, of European Union, or?
Well, in general, I strongly believe that prices for agricultural products are too low. I think if consumers want to eat healthy, good quality food, they have to be prepared to pay more. And I don't believe that it's okay that a liter of milk is cheaper than a liter of Coke. Okay? I think that's wrong. And therefore, I think quality produce from farmers need to be rewarded with a higher price as of today. And then you have the problem of those consumers who can't afford to pay these prices. And in many countries of the world, like in the United States or in Brazil, countries like that, not the farmers are subsidized to get lower prices, but the consumers are subsidized to afford to pay slightly higher prices. When you look what the price of a chicken in a supermarket, that's impossible that this is good. How can a healthy chicken be grown? I have chicken on my farm. We have a little farm. My wife basically has a horse farm. So I'm the sponsor. She's very successful because she generates a consistent loss every year. We have chicken, and we know what, let's say, the cost of a good egg is. We have bees, which is a complicated business. If you want to have bees, You need to understand how it works. It needs a lot of know-how and also a lot of work. If there weren't so many beekeepers who do that as a hobby, the price of honey is also too low. So that means we need to get used to pay correct prices for quality products.
Yeah.
We have horses, but we don't eat them.
We will discuss on the line.
Okay, thank you. We have a student question from Stefan from secondary school in Lučenec. I would like to ask, what is your opinion on Roundup ready soya growing? Thank you.
To be honest, I don't know. Roundup is a product which is widely discussed. Roundup has certain negative side effects on the environment, and therefore, I think one should think about technologies where you don't need Roundup automatically. And if you use Roundup, it belongs in the hands of very professional people. In America, a lot of normal people use Roundup for their garden, for their driveway, and things like that. That's a nightmare. And it's really a dangerous product.
Thank you. What do you think about future farming? Is autonomous agro-robots future? It's a very interesting question.
Yes, I think so. It starts in labor-intensive farming like vegetables, asparagus, wine. There are robots already today. You can harvest wine. They're too expensive still right now, which is why. And then manual labor is still better. They're less damage. We have in Eco during my time developed a small robot called Xava. Xava can only do one thing so far, which is planting, single corn planting, and it's a small robot, autonomous, completely automatic, and it can harvest with one load of seed about 2 hectares of land. That's not super, but it's a good beginning.
Thank you very
much.
And
I think those robots will start to work in swarms. So instead of having one super big tractor or combine, you might have more smaller combines working coordinated, driverless.
Like drones.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
What have been your biggest lesson learned throughout your career when it comes to leadership?
Well, I think it's very important that you listen. That's one of my beliefs. I believe, and that's what I did, I say what I think, and I do what I say. I think that is extremely important, and as I always said, you need to be prepared to learn continuously.
It's a very nice idea. I need to write it down.
I will give you a book. I did write a book called Simply Management, and you can basically...
Perfect. All right. If the world needs to shift from meat consumption to more plant-based diet to sustain ourselves in context of climate change, how will a meat-eater USA adapt?
Over time. So in America, you can see that the change is starting on the West Coast, where the more educated people live, and in New York. And then the East Coast, and basically the grain belt is where all the meat eaters are, but they also die earlier than people who eat healthy. So we have a problem in America with diabetes, we have a problem with strokes, with heart attacks, and I think this is when people automatically start to consider, maybe I shouldn't eat meat every day. And they not only eat meat, they eat huge portions of meat. So when you eat a steak in an American restaurant, I normally can only eat half of it. Fortunately, I have 2 dogs.
Okay, thank you very much.
This could be Putin.
Hopefully not. We have a question from Mr. Lančarič.
Thank you very much. I think the cable is not cooperating. Okay, should be better now. So, Mr. Professor, if possible, I would like to ask, what's your opinion about the common agricultural policy as of such? Do you think it's not too rigid because it's using like one fit for all, regardless the farm structure? So, what's your opinion? Should it be changed somehow in the near future? Common agricultural policy of EU. It's like in Slovakia, for example, there is completely different structure, farm structure, when compared to Austria, for example. So, do you think about the tools which are used, whether they are good for all or it should be like more diversified?
Well, overall, I believe that the European Union needs to develop into more alignment and more common policies, whether it's taxes or subsidies or other laws, and therefore I also strongly believe that this should happen in agriculture. I don't think that it's good that we have different regulations all over Europe, but I also know it's complicated. I know Frau von der Leyen personally very well, but I know it's taking a lot of time and it will be slow, but I think it will happen. I'm an optimist, so therefore I believe it will happen. Whether I will see it happening during my lifetime, I'll turn 70 this year, I'm not so sure, but I hope.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Putin left. Another question, Mr. Professor, since we assume that you know this region a bit, what do you think that what are the key opportunities in our sector, and what are key decisions which needs to be done?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I do not know your region well. But coming here this morning, I thought, well, this is a very nice area. And there are simple things which I think need to be done. You somewhere mentioned, or your father, that you might also be attractive for tourism. If you want to be attractive for tourism, you need to clean up the region. You need to dismantle all the old communist factory buildings and what all you have, and make your region look nicer. Make it look like Switzerland or Austria, with all the different problems they have with their strange people living there. But you want this region to look like a paradise, and that is something which can be done. It only needs, first of all, that you want to do that. It needs kind of a vision, and then it needs people who do it. Scrap the old cars and tractors which are standing around on fields and farms. Dismantle the buildings, plant trees, and make your country look wonderful, which is possible. You have a super forest here, but are there trails? Can you walk there? I think it could be a super hunting resort also, things like that. But that needs initiative, and a lot of these initiatives can be ruled out by normal people. If every citizen starts to think about the environment in a way that they wake up in the morning and say, well, what can I clean up today, starting from their backyard, that would make already a big change.
Thank you very much.
That's also something for politicians, by the way.
That's why I'm going to another issue. Okay, what would be your advice for young people? How they should start their entrepreneurship or to set up the company if they don't have money or they have not grown up in an agricultural family?
Well, my son always wanted to become a farmer, and we didn't have 1 square meter of land. And I said the only way how you can become a farmer, marry a woman which owns a lot of land. So that's the first advice for young farmers, whether they're male or female. And what I knew from my days at students, the students had names like the 1,000-hectare Isabella or 400-hectare Karl. So that means this is an important way how you can go into farming. When it comes to starting up business, it's very important that you have a very precise plan, very precise business plan, and then you find programs supported by the EU, but maybe also by your country, I don't know, where startups get subsidies, mainly subsidies through financing those businesses. So that means you have a great idea, you need 500,000 euros. I think if the idea is really good, you will find somebody who is prepared to sponsor you, let's call it like this, or to finance you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I think we are at the end of our presentation and our discussions. Time is running out. I may give you the last chance and the last opportunity to pose the question. Not so many hands.
There's
all right,
one.
there is one.
He
Perfect.
looks like a journalist.
Used to be.
Yeah.
Zvykol som byť dávno. My question is that as you have a very good experiences with managing top-down hierarchy global organization, since Davos World Economic Forum, we see emerging new concept of decentralized autonomous organizations or corporations. What do you think about the clash in between these two concepts?
The what concept?
Decentralized.
I strongly believe in decentralization. So what I always was honest, and I want people, business, a company is not a democracy. So in my company, let's say there was one guy saying what needed to be done. That was me. And I think it's maybe Jan or Andre in their company. So it's not so that we ask everybody, what do you think we should do? But when the plan was clear, when the targets were agreed, measurable targets were agreed, I believed very much, and that's what made us successful, in decentralization. Because if you basically have great people and micromanage them all the time, that doesn't work. They will leave. So instead of talking about the road all the time, I talked about the objective. And then the road, I didn't get involved in at all. Just give you a concrete example. You have a salesperson, and she's in charge of selling combines in Slovakia. You have a target. I don't know how big the market is. Let's say 100 units with an average price of so many euros. I did not influence the pricing at all. So that means the sales manager was allowed to give one combine away. If he had done that, he would, in theory, have to sell the second one for twice the price. So, but this is, I think, the best way to success and also to get great people is decentralization. Good question.
Okay.
Only good questions this morning. Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for coming here, and thank you, Mr. Professor, for your presentation. And big applause.